The stars had always seemed peaceful to those who watched them from Earth. Countless generations had looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. They got their answer on a cold morning in October, when 300 alien warships appeared near Jupiter and blocked out the light of distant suns. Supreme Commander Kethra stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and studied the small blue planet on her display screen. She had done this 17 times before with 17 different worlds. Each time, the result was the same. She would send her message. The primitive species would panic, and within days they would kneel before the might of the Vecturi Dominion. It was the natural order of things. The strong ruled. The weak served. This was how the galaxy worked. Her second officer, a younger Vecturi named Toric, pulled up the data they had collected about this species. "They call themselves humans," he said. "They have only had space travel for about 70 of their years. They fight among themselves constantly. They have divided their single planet into nearly 200 separate territories, each with its own leader." He made a sound that was the Vecturi equivalent of a laugh. "They cannot even unite their own world. They will fall before us like all the others." Kethra nodded slowly. She had seen species like this before. Young, divided, still learning the basic lessons of civilization. They would be easy to control once they understood that resistance was pointless. The Dominion did not destroy useful species. They absorbed them. Human workers would mine or build ships and serve the Empire. Their scientists would be put to work on Vecturi projects. Their soldiers would be trained to fight in Vecturi armies. This was the gift the Dominion offered: purpose and order in exchange for freedom. "Send the message," Kethra ordered. The transmission went out on every frequency the humans used. It was translated into their major languages by the Dominion's computers. The message was simple: surrender now. Accept Vecturi rule. Resist and be destroyed. They had 24 hours to respond. Kethra retired to her quarters to rest. She expected to wake to news of human diplomats begging for mercy. This was always how it went. But when she woke, Tarek was waiting with a strange expression on his face. "They have not responded," he said. Kethra blinked. "Not at all?" "Nothing. Complete silence." This was unusual. Most species responded within hours, either with surrender or with desperate pleas for more time. The humans had done neither. Perhaps their communication systems were more primitive than expected. Perhaps the message had not been received clearly. "Send it again," Kethra ordered. "Make it clearer. Show them footage of our fleet. Let them see what they face." The second message went out with images of Vecturi warships. 300 vessels, each one capable of destroying a city in a single shot. The combined firepower of the fleet could crack a planet's crust. No species in the history of the Dominion had ever defeated such a force. Another day passed. Then another. Still nothing. On the fourth day, a response finally came. It was not what Kethra expected. The transmission came from a station orbiting the human moon. It was short, only a few seconds long. A human male appeared on the screen. He wore a uniform of some kind, dark blue with symbols Kethra did not recognize. His face was hard and showed no fear. He spoke 5 words in his language, which the computer translated instantly. "Come and take it." Kethra stared at the screen for a long moment. "What does this mean?" she asked. Tarek checked his data. It appears to be a phrase from human history. It was spoken by warriors who chose to fight against impossible odds rather than surrender. It means they refuse. They refuse? Kethra could not understand. She had explained what would happen. She had shown them the fleet. Any rational species would see that fighting was suicide. They cannot refuse. This is not how it works. It seems the humans do not know how it works. Torek said quietly. Kethra ordered an envoy ship sent to the human homeworld. Perhaps direct contact would make them understand. Perhaps seeing a Vecturi in person would finally break through their strange stubbornness. The envoy ship was destroyed the moment it crossed into the inner system. The humans had weapons on their moon, primitive railguns that fired metal projectiles at high speeds. The ship's shields held against the first shot, but the second and third punched through the hull. 300 Vecturi died in seconds. For the first time in her long career, Kethra felt something she did not recognize. It took her a moment to identify the feeling. It was surprise. Real surprise. And beneath it, something else. Something that might have been the beginning of fear. On Earth, the response to the alien ultimatum had been chaos at first. Governments screamed at each other through diplomatic channels. Old enemies blamed old enemies. Some leaders wanted to surrender immediately. Others wanted to fight. Everyone had an opinion, and no one agreed. But something strange happened in those first days. As the humans watched the alien fleet on their telescopes and screens, as they saw the massive warships waiting among the stars, a change came over them. The fighting stopped. The arguments died down. One by one, the leaders of Earth looked at each other and came to the same conclusion. They would not kneel. In Russia, generals opened their most secret files and shared them with America. In China, military commanders linked their defense networks with European systems. Countries that had been enemies for centuries suddenly became allies. It took 48 hours for the human race to do something it had never done before: unite completely against a common enemy. The humans knew they could not win. The math was simple. 300 alien warships against a species that had barely reached its own moon. Their weapons were primitive, their ships were slow, and their numbers were small. By any reasonable measure, they should have surrendered. But humans had never been reasonable about freedom. Their history was written in the blood of people who had fought against impossible odds. They had rebelled against empires. They had resisted tyrants. They had faced death rather than live as slaves. This was not new to them. This was what they did. When Kethra received word that her envoy ship had been destroyed, she realized she had made a mistake. She had studied human technology and human politics. She had not studied human history. If she had, she might have understood why they refused to surrender. But it was too late for that now. The war had begun, 6 months after the first shots were fired. Supreme Commander Kethra stood in the ruins of what the humans called New York City and wondered where everything had gone wrong. The initial invasion had proceeded as planned. The Vecturi fleet had moved into orbit around Earth and begun the bombardment. The great human cities burned. Millions died in the first wave. The humans had no weapons that could reach the ships in orbit, no shields to protect their buildings, no way to stop the fire that fell from the sky. Kethra had expected surrender within days. Instead, she received reports that confused and disturbed her. The humans were not gathering to negotiate. They were dispersing. They were going underground, into tunnels and bunkers that seemed to exist beneath every major population center. Some of these shelters had been built decades ago, during something the humans called the Cold War. They had spent years preparing to survive the destruction of their own civilization. They simply adapted those preparations for alien attack. When Vecturi ground forces landed to occupy the ruins, they found the cities empty. The humans were gone, vanished into the rubble and the tunnels like ghosts. The soldiers searched building after building and found nothing but shadows and silence. Then, the attacks began. The first incident happened outside a place called Paris. A Vecturi patrol was moving through the broken streets when the ground beneath them exploded. The humans had buried bombs under the road, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. 20 soldiers died instantly. The rest were killed by human fighters who emerged from the rubble with crude weapons and terrible fury. This pattern repeated across the planet. Every time the Vectri established a position, the humans struck at night and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. They used weapons made from anything they could find. They turned farming equipment into armored vehicles. They converted industrial chemicals into explosives. They rigged entire buildings to collapse on Vectri troops. Kethra had conquered 17 worlds, but she had never seen anything like this. The other species she had defeated understood when they were beaten. They accepted occupation and became obedient servants of the Dominion. The humans seemed incapable of this basic survival instinct. Every time she thought she had crushed them, they came back angrier and more determined than before. The body count climbed on both sides. The Vectri lost hundreds of soldiers every week. The humans lost thousands. But while Vectri morale crumbled with each death, the humans seemed to draw strength from their losses. Captured Dominion troops reported strange rituals before their execution. The human fighters would show them images of dead children and destroyed homes. "This is why we fight," they would say. "This is what you did. We will never forgive. We will never forget." Torek came to Kethra with a report that troubled her deeply. "Our soldiers are refusing deployment orders," he said. "They say the humans are not like other species. They say the humans are monsters who cannot be killed." "That is superstitious nonsense," Kethra replied. "Is it?" Torek pulled up a video captured by a soldier's helmet camera. It showed a human warrior in the ruins of a city called Moscow. The human had been shot 3 times. Any Vectri would have been dead or dying from such wounds. But the human kept walking forward, kept fighting, and killed 3 soldiers with a broken rifle before finally collapsing. "They do not know when to die," Torek said quietly. "They fight until their bodies fail completely. And even then, they sometimes keep fighting." Kethra requested reinforcements from Dominion High Command. She was denied. The Dominion had never needed reinforcements against a single system species. She requested permission to deploy extinction-level weapons, to simply destroy all life on Earth and be done with it. This was also denied. The Dominion wanted slaves and resources, not a dead rock dot, so the war continued, grinding on month after month. The Vectri controlled the skies and the ruins of the great cities. The humans controlled everything else. They moved through tunnels like blood through veins, striking wherever the Dominion was weakest, always vanishing before they could be caught. A new problem emerged as the war stretched on. The Vectri soldiers began to change. They had been trained to conquer weak species and maintain order among slaves. They had not been trained for this kind of warfare, where every shadow might hide an enemy and every piece of rubble might be a trap. They stopped sleeping properly. They jumped at small sounds. Some of them began to refuse leaving their fortified positions. Kethra heard whispers among her troops. They spoke of human ghosts that walked through walls. They spoke of soldiers who had been killed but were seen fighting again days later. They spoke of a human darkness that had infected the war, turning it into something that could not be won. She dismissed these stories as weakness and fear. But part of her wondered if they might be true. The humans fought with a rage she did not understand, a desperate fury that seemed to draw from some deep well that never ran dry. They had lost their cities, their governments, their way of life. By all logic, they should have given up. Instead, they fought harder. In the 8th month of the war, Kethra received a report that changed everything. Human forces had attacked a supply depot near a city called Beijing. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the weapon they used. It was not a bomb or a gun. It was a captured Vectri plasma rifle, modified with human technology to fire faster and hit harder. The humans were learning. They were adapting. They were taking Dominion weapons and making them better. For the first time, Kethra felt real fear. Not the small fear of losing soldiers or missing targets. The deep fear of facing an enemy that might actually be able to hurt you. She looked out the window of her command center at the ruined city below. Somewhere in that rubble, humans were watching her, waiting, planning their next attack. They had lost everything, and they were still fighting. Kethra began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. The war's second year began with news that sent shock waves through the entire Vectory fleet. The humans had returned to space, thought it should have been impossible. The Dominion had destroyed all of Earth's orbital infrastructure in the first days of the invasion. Satellites, space stations, shipyards, everything that could threaten the fleet had been turned to burning debris. The humans should have been trapped on their planet forever, but Kethra had learned one important lesson in 18 months of war. Humans did not care what should be impossible. Intelligence reports revealed the truth. The humans had built launch facilities underground, hidden from orbital sensors. For an entire year, while they fought and died on the surface, other humans had been working in secret tunnels, building ships from salvaged alien technology and their own crude machines. The ships were ugly and poorly designed by Dominion standards. They were held together with welded metal and human stubbornness. But they flew, and they carried weapons. The first human warship to engage the Vectory fleet was destroyed in minutes. Its shields were weak, its weapons barely scratched the Dominion armor, and its crew died screaming into the void. The second ship suffered the same fate. The third ship did something different. Instead of trying to fight, it accelerated directly toward a Vectory supply cruiser. Kethra watched on her display screen as the small human vessel crashed into the larger ship at full speed, then detonated its reactor core. The explosion destroyed both vessels instantly. The humans had invented a new weapon, themselves. More ships came. Most were destroyed, but each one took something with it. A transport here, a patrol craft there. The humans died in terrible numbers, but they kept coming. An endless stream of desperate warriors throwing themselves against the Dominion fleet like waves against a cliff. And then something unexpected happened. Something Kethra had never imagined possible. Word of humanity's resistance had spread. The Dominion controlled 17 conquered worlds, each filled with slave species who had surrendered long ago. For generations, these species had accepted their place in the order of things. They worked. They obeyed. They did not fight, but now they heard stories of a species that refused to kneel. A species that fought against impossible odds and kept fighting even when they should have died. A species that would rather burn than serve. On the mining world of Vecthos Prime, slaves stopped working. On the agricultural planet of Sereth, overseers were killed in their sleep. On a dozen worlds across 3 galactic arms, populations that had been docile for centuries suddenly remembered what it meant to resist. Graffiti appeared on walls in 100 different languages. The words varied, but the message was always the same. Humanity fights. The Dominion had built its empire on a simple truth. Conquered species do not resist. They cannot resist. Resistance is irrational, pointless, suicide. Every species understands this. Every species surrenders. Every species except one. The war became impossible to sustain. Every ship sent to Sol was a ship that could not suppress rebellions elsewhere. The Dominion's carefully maintained order was cracking. And at the center of every crack was the same image. Humans bloodied and beaten. Still standing. Dominion High Command summoned Kethra to answer for her failure. She had been given an easy assignment, a young species with no real military power, and somehow she had turned it into a disaster that threatened the entire empire. She was ordered to return home immediately. Before she could leave, a transmission reached the flagship. It came from somewhere on Earth's surface, from a bunker hidden beneath mountains the humans called the Rockies. The transmission was short, just a few seconds long. A human woman appeared on the screen. She was old, with gray hair and burn scars covering half her face. Her eyes were hard and showed no fear. She spoke a single sentence, and Kethra felt ice form in her blood. "We are coming for you." 3 days later, they came. The attack was coordinated across multiple fronts. Human ships emerged from hiding, joined by vessels from 4 other species that had thrown off Dominion control. They hit the Vectory fleet from every direction, a swarm of small craft against massive warships. The mathematics said they would lose. The Dominion had superior numbers, superior firepower, superior everything. There was no scenario in which the attackers could win, but the humans did not care about mathematics. They cared about freedom. They cared about revenge. They cared about proving to the galaxy that surrender was not the only option. Kethra's flagship was surrounded. Human ships crashed into its shields, detonated against its hull, tore through its armor with weapons that should not have worked. The great vessel began to fall, fire spreading through its corridors, explosions ripping through its decks. In her final moments, Kethra watched the human ships on her display screen. They were taking losses, terrible losses. But they kept coming. They always kept coming. Her last transmission was a scream, cut short as the bridge collapsed around her dot. The Vectory fleet began its retreat. Behind them, a species that should have been crushed watched them run. Humans stood in the rubble of their cities and watched the lights in the sky grow smaller. They did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They simply began planning the next step. There were other species out there, still enslaved, still waiting for freedom. And humanity had learned something important about itself in 2 years of war. They were good at fighting. They were good at surviving. And they would never, ever give up. The stars had seemed peaceful once. Now they were a battlefield. And humanity was just getting started. The great retreat of the Vectory Dominion became a legend across the galaxy. For the first time in their long history, the conquerors had become the conquered. Ships that had once inspired terror now fled through space with human vessels, hunting them like wolves chasing wounded prey. On Earth, the survivors emerged from their tunnels and bunkers to see a sky free of alien warships. The cities were ruins, the landscape scarred by 2 years of brutal warfare. Billions had died. Everything the humans had built over thousands of years had been reduced to rubble and ash. But they had one. General Maria Santos stood in the wreckage of what had once been the United Nations headquarters in New York. She was 63 years old, and the burn scars on her face told the story of the war better than any words could. She had been a diplomat before the invasion, a woman who believed in peace and negotiation. The Vectory had taught her different lessons. Around her stood the leaders who had survived the war. Presidents and generals, scientists and soldiers, people from every nation on Earth who had put aside their differences to fight a common enemy. They looked tired and broken, but their eyes held something that had not been there before the invasion. A new kind of strength, a new kind of purpose. "We cannot stop here," Santos said. Her voice was rough from years of giving orders in smoke-filled bunkers. "The Dominion is retreating, but they are not destroyed. They will rebuild. They will return. And there are other empires out there, other species that might see Earth as an easy target." A younger man stepped forward. His name was James Chun, and he had been an engineer before the war. Now he commanded what remained of humanity's new space fleet. "Our ships are barely holding together," he said. "We lost 70% of our forces in the final battle. We need time to rebuild." "Time is something we don't have," Santos replied. "Every day we wait, the Dominion grows stronger. Every day we rest, they prepare for revenge." She turned to face the group, and her eyes were hard as stone. "We have a choice. We can stay here and rebuild our world, try to live in peace, and hope the galaxy leaves us alone. Or we can take the fight to them. We can make sure that no species ever threatens Earth again." The vote was unanimous. Humanity would not hide. Humanity would not hope for peace. Humanity would spread across the stars and show the galaxy what happened to those who tried to conquer them. The rebuilding began immediately. Factories rose from the ashes of old cities, now dedicated to building warships instead of consumer goods. Scientists studied captured vectory technology and improved upon it, creating weapons and shields that were stronger and faster than anything the Dominion had. Young humans who had grown up in bunkers and tunnels enlisted by the millions, eager to carry the war to distant stars. Within 5 years, the human fleet had grown from a handful of surviving ships to a force of over 2,000 vessels. They were not as elegant as vectory warships. They were ugly and brutal, designed for one purpose: war. But they worked. And they were crewed by humans who had survived the worst the galaxy could throw at them. The first liberation came on a world called Sereth, where a species of gentle farmers had been enslaved for 300 years. Human ships arrived without warning and tore through the vectory occupation forces in less than a day. When the humans landed, the Sereth did not know what to make of them. These strange two-legged creatures with their hard eyes and scarred bodies. Were they new conquerors? New masters? General Santos addressed the Sereth leaders personally. "We are not here to rule you," she said. "We are here to free you. What you do with that freedom is your choice." The Sereth wept. They had forgotten what choice meant. Word spread across the galaxy. The humans were coming. They were liberating world after world, smashing Dominion forces wherever they found them. Some species joined the human alliance willingly, grateful to be free at last. Others were suspicious, afraid that the humans were simply a new kind of conqueror. But everywhere they went, the humans proved their word was true. They fought, they freed, and then they left local populations to govern themselves. The Vectory Dominion tried to stop them. They gathered their remaining fleets and launched a counterattack against a human staging area near a star called Rigel. It was the largest space battle in galactic history. Thousands of ships on each side, fighting for control of the future. The humans won. Not easily, not without terrible losses, but they won. The Vectory admiral who commanded the counterattack was captured alive and brought before General Santos for questioning. The admiral was old, a veteran of dozens of conquests. He looked at the human woman with eyes that no longer held any pride. "I do not understand you," he said. "We had superior numbers. We had superior technology. We had every advantage. How did you win?" Santos considered the question for a long moment. "You tried to make us surrender," she finally said. "You expected us to calculate the odds and decide that fighting was pointless. Every other species you conquered did exactly that. They saw your power and decided that serving was better than dying." She leaned forward, and the admiral saw something in her eyes that made him look away. "But we are not like other species. We have spent our entire history fighting against power, against empires, against anyone who tried to tell us that we had to kneel. Sometimes we fought each other. Sometimes we fought our own governments. We are not a peaceful species. We are not a rational species. We are a species that would rather die than live without freedom." The admiral was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "You are monsters." Santa smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Maybe, but we are free monsters. And we will make sure every species in this galaxy has the chance to be free too. Even yours." The war continued for another decade. The human alliance grew stronger with each passing year as more species joined their cause. The Vecthory Dominion shrank and fractured, torn apart by internal rebellions and external pressure. Eventually, even the Vecthory homeworld fell, conquered by the very species they had once planned to enslave. But the humans did not destroy them. They did not enslave them. They offered them the same choice they offered everyone else: join the alliance as equals, or go your own way in peace. Most Vecthory chose to join. A few scattered across the galaxy, unable to accept that their empire was gone forever. 50 years after the invasion of Earth, General Maria Santos died peacefully in her sleep. She was 113 years old, and she had lived to see the galaxy transformed. The old empires were gone, replaced by a loose alliance of free species who traded and cooperated and sometimes argued, but never conquered. Her last words were recorded by the nurse who attended her. She looked out the window at the stars and smiled. "We did it," she whispered. "We showed them." In the end, the aliens had expected submission. They had calculated the odds and assumed that humanity would kneel like every other species. They had not understood that humans were different. They had not understood that some species carry fire in their blood, a burning need for freedom that no amount of logic or force can ever extinguish. The galaxy had learned a new truth: never threaten humanity. Never try to make them surrender. Because humans do not calculate the odds. They do not accept the inevitable. They fight until they win, or until there is nothing left of them to fight. The stars were peaceful now, but they would never forget the species that refused to kneel.